Hello besties and welcome to another Genshin theory! At this point I have once again run out of things to do theories on since I feel like I've covered everything Genshin has to offer. I've been playing a lot of Honkai Star Rail lately to fill that void, and it reminded me of something in Genshin that I thought I'd completely forgotten about. Remember this name card? This has been in Genshin since it launched all the way back in 2020. It shows the symbols for the 7 elements arranged in an awkward pattern that makes no sense at all. They're not in any meaningful order, and there's 2 big gaps that could be filled with other symbols. Normally we could just assume that they had a bad graphic designer on this one, but it makes a little more sense when you read the name card's description. Light can refract into countless colors, but people stop at 7 because they're too lazy to count. Perhaps the elements are like that too. Tevat's structure in society revolves around there being 7 elements, no more and no less. There are 7 elements, 7 countries, and 7 archons. Adding or subtracting one would throw off everything. But I think this is only true of modern Tevat. The Byakuyakoku collection is the best book in the game for lore about Tevat before the Archon War. This book comes from Enkanomiya before its people were able to go back to life above ground, so everything here was written a really long time ago. Normally we look at Volume 2 before Sun and Moon, but this time I don't think that one is going to help us, at least not by itself. Instead we can look at Volume 4, Bathysmal Bishop Experiment Records. The experiment records themselves are of little interest to me right now since they really have nothing to do with this video. But the preface in this volume is really strange. It says, dossier serial numbers shall no longer use the categories alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and epsilon, which use the ancient Watatsumi tongue. Instead, we shall use earth, water, fire, wind, ether, and void going forward. These categories are just used to differentiate bishops and experiments, but doesn't it seem weird to you that they chose the names of elements for that? And more importantly, isn't it weird that they only listed 6 and 2 of them aren't even elements we're familiar with in Tevat? Earth, water, fire, and wind all make sense. They would just be Geo, Hydro, Pyro, and Animo. But what about Ether and Void? Those aren't really elements, at least not in the way that the others are. In ancient Greece, ether was an element believed to be related to spirituality and natural phenomena like light and gravity. Ether was considered to be circular and unmoving, while the others were the opposite. In Greek mythology, ether is the air that the gods breathe and the emptiness of space. Basically, it's this all-encompassing super powerful thing that no one can really explain or even see. Similarly, void is another invisible element with spiritual properties. In Chinese and Japanese Buddhist philosophies, void is pretty much the same thing as ether. People attuned to void have the ability to intuit their surroundings without thinking or using any of their 5 senses. Like ether, void is meant to be beyond human comprehension. It makes sense for ether and void to show up in Enkanomiya since it's based on both ancient Greece and Japan. I think it's kinda annoying that they included both even though they're so similar, but at the same time, hydro and cryo are literally the exact same thing, just in different states of matter, so I don't think it matters that much. So if ether and void existed in Enkanomiya, which they clearly did since people knew enough about them to write their names down, then where did they go? Why is there no ether or void element anymore? Obviously you're all familiar with the Archon War by now. Celestia offered 7 Gnosis to the gods who had to kill each other to get one. We know that Barbados, Morax, Baal, and Beelzebul already all used the elements that they got Gnosis for beforehand, but how is that possible? A Gnosis isn't like a vision, it doesn't give you the ability to wield an element. A Gnosis is used to resonate with Celestia, but at the same time they're clearly tied to their Archon's element, like just look at them. When Celestia started the Archon War, were the Gnosis already related to certain elements, or did they become that way after being earned? Who knows? I definitely don't. The point is that I don't think Tevat was always like this, with only 7 elements. The Bathysmal Bishop Experiment records make that clear. After the Archon War, most of the gods who lost left Tevat and went to the Dark Sea, which is just the rest of the world outside of the continent of Tevat. With their departures, they may have taken their unique elements with them. That could explain why Ether and Void are no longer present in modern Tevat, but definitely did exist before the Archon War. But that's too easy of an answer. I'm not ready to end this video before it hits 8 minutes, so I have a much darker and more complicated explanation. Ether and Void are very powerful elements in comparison to the other 7 that we know. Like, Void is literally supposed to let you determine your surroundings without thinking or doing anything. I don't think a rock or a plant can do that, sorry guys. Ether and Void are too powerful for just anyone to use. When Celestia started the Archon War, maybe they had more reasons than just one. I mean, if Ether and Void worked the same way in Genshin as they are described in real life, that could be a huge issue for Celestia. We all know how Celestia feels when people, especially humans, get a little too powerful or self-sufficient. Maybe Celestia had already decided that they wanted Ether and Void gone, and they just used the Archon War as a way of making that happen. If Ether and Void were to work the same way the other elements do, then humans could hypothetically have Ether and Void visions. There's no way that Celestia would want that. But there's a problem with that. There technically has always been 7 main elements in Tevat, even before Celestia made it so. The first known event in Tevat's history is the arrival of the Primordial One and their defeat of the 7 Sovereigns. The Sovereigns were the most powerful dragons of their respective elements, so even in Tevat's earliest stages, the number 7 was important when it came to the elements. I've said it 1,000 times and I'll say it again, we don't know if the primordial one is still alive. They went to war with another god called the Second Who Came a long time ago, and no one actually knows who won that war, but we do know the winner created Celestia as we know it today. If the primordial one really was the winner, then why would they re-establish the prominence of 7 elements when the first thing they did in Teyvat was shut that down? It makes no sense to me for the primordial one acting as Celestia to cause the Archon War with initial plans of re-implementing a 7-element system. That sounds like something someone else would do, someone who doesn't agree with the primordial one. So yes, there were originally 7 elements in Teyvat, but the primordial one got rid of that structure, but then the Second Who Came probably defeated them in a war and then caused the Archon War in order to restore the 7 elements that had been pushed out of importance. I'm sure you're all aware that Genshin is only one game in a series following an interconnected multiverse. The other side of that multiverse is Honkai Impact. Recently, Hoyoverse released another Honkai game, Honkai Star Rail. Like Genshin, Star Rail has elemental-based gameplay, with each playable character having an element that they use. Those elements are fire, ice, lightning, wind, physical, quantum, and imaginary. Those last 3 don't exist in Teyvat, but since Honkai and Genshin exist within the same multiverse, then it's possible that physical, quantum, and imaginary could have been in Teyvat at some point. But this is all just a lot of speculation. We've actually already seen an 8th element. The Abyss is not just a place or a location, it's also an element used by Dainsleif, the Abyss Order, and various Conrian monsters. This is literally all the evidence we need to determine that there are more than 7 elements in Teyvat. The game shoves it in your face over and over again. Whether the Abyss element is actually ether, void, quantum, imaginary, or something else entirely is unclear, but what is clear is that it exists, and that's all that matters. Happy Pride Month, everyone! This is my favorite month of the year because I finally have an excuse to talk about being a lesbian non-stop, and no one can tell me to shut up because it's my month. I'd love to hear how you're all celebrating, so feel free to comment what you're doing for Pride this year or just what it means to you. As for Genshin, I kinda want to know how everyone feels about this TCG event. I'm not a huge fan of the game, but I think it's cool that we get to go to every country and talk to lots of people for the story. Plus, we even got our first Fontaine character, Charlotte. I called it months ago when I said there'd be a reporter character from Fontaine. I could be wrong, but judging by the patterns that each country is released in, the next update will probably be the last one before we go to Fontaine in 4.0. We have so much exciting stuff to look forward to in Genshin, and I'm sure I'll have a lot to say as we get closer to Fontaine's release. I actually already did a video with my predictions for Fontaine, so I'll link that in the description because I want you to watch it because I think it's a good video. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye, besties!